So first, let's go in and add columns to our library. Now the columns that we want to add, if you have the handout and you look at page 2, we want to add what app we use to create this, what version of Office, what document type, and whether or not the document is active. So there are 4 custom fields of metadata that we want to add. What kind of application it relates to, what version or versions of Office, the type of document that it is, and whether or not it's active. Let's go ahead and create those columns then.
So while you're doing that, we had a question come up about the tags and are these things searchable? So as you're doing this, will you answer that question back into your piece as you create stuff?
About the tags.
Well, as you add metadata, are things searchable?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you might want to just show that as you do your piece.
No, that's great, because it's not just searchable, but it's also filterable and sortable.
Okay.
So metadata gives us a lot of power. There's a lot of searchability with SharePoint, but metadata is even in some ways better than that. So let's go ahead and create a new column. And the column we're going to create is the column for application, and I just am using app because that's good enough. And I have choices now about how I create this column. I can choose to add this as a single line of text. Somebody can type, but when it gets to be more than a line, they don't get to press enter and keep typing. Multiple lines of text, you might use that for something like a description or an abstract. A choice, which is going to be a list that they can choose from, either using a drop-down or radio buttons. Those are all text choices. Number, which can be 1, 2, 2.9, whatever you'd like. We can specify the number of decimal places. Currency, date and time, which is also date or date and time. So if you just want a date, you just choose date and time. Look up information that's already someplace else on this site. A checkbox, yes or no, that we can use for a field like active. A person or a group that is someplace in this site, and you'd use this, for example, in a list where you assigned someone from this site to do something. A hyperlink or a picture, so you might want to have somebody take a picture of a facility or a piece of equipment and be able to attach that image here. A field that you and I calculate based on other columns. Some data we pull from externally from SQL Server or someplace else, or managed metadata. And those last two, as a site owner, you don't even need to worry about external data or managed metadata right now. Most of the time, you're going to use either single line of text or choice or one of the number fields or date time. Those are real common. I could just let every user type in whatever they want to for an application name. And when I do that, it makes it really hard later on to sort and filter and do reports, because somebody might type in Excel, but they might type in Microsoft Excel, they might type in MS Excel. I actually want to give users a list of things to choose from, because that makes it much easier for me to be able to get quality data from our application here. So I'm going to choose choice. When I do, the page shifts a little bit, and it's asking me for a description. And this is going to be application that the material is used to teach. Okay? Do I require that this column contains information? The question here is, when somebody uploads a new document to my training library, is it okay at that time, at the moment of upload, that they don't necessarily know if this is used for Word, Excel, or Office? I'm going to say, they should know. And because if I don't get it then, I'll probably never get this piece of metadata. So I'm going to say, yes, you need to be able to tell me what application this material is used for if you're going to put it in the library. I want you to notice that I'm trying to be very specific here, you can't make something a required field later. You can only make it required at the time that somebody creates a new document or uploads. So if we want it to be required at all, we have to know that they actually have access to that information at that point. If they don't, you can't make it required. If you want it to be required, then you need to make sure that they'll be able to reasonably make a choice at that point in time. The second item says enforce unique values. So imagine that we have a list of books or DVDs, and each of them has a unique, a unique ISBN or a unique code. And we want, so if the book's already in our list, we don't want it to be entered again. If the DVD's already showing in our library, we don't want it to be entered again. In that case, we can enforce unique values, and we would only allow somebody to enter something once. But that's not the case here. We're going to see the words Excel and Office and Word over and over and over again. So we don't want unique values here. The next thing then we're going to do is enter our choices. There are two schools of thought about this, and one of these two is going to be what you want to do most of the time. There's a school of thought that says that we have a couple of values that we use over and over again. We're going to put them towards the top of the list. And then we're going to have the rest of the values in alphabetical order. So an example of that might be if most of the people who you were entering into a list lived in the state of Florida, you might then put FL at the top of the list and then put all the other states in alphabetical order. But most of the time, what people like is they like a list that's in alphabetical order, pure and simple. And in SharePoint, you don't have to make the first value the default value as you do in many other lists, like drop-down lists you create in Excel. So we have the ability to have a default that's separate from the list. What I would encourage you to do is don't assume that an unordered list is useful. All it does is it makes your folks really curious. You might say it makes them more than curious, because as human beings, you and I try to order things. We do it naturally. It's what people do. So if we don't do that, if we don't provide an easily ordered list that people can look at and go, oh, alpha order, and they do that, you and I do it, we don't even think about it, then people will always slow down a little bit trying to figure out what the sensibility about this is. So I'm going to put in Access, followed by Excel, followed by InfoPath, followed by PowerPoint, followed by Office, and followed by Word. Notice that Office is actually all of these applications, so it might be that if something's an overview, it will be Office would be a better choice than any of the others. If you're creating a list and you don't know that you have all the choices, and we require it as we did here, what if somebody wants to put something in here and it's not one of these choices because we've said they have to provide this information? For right now, we might add other to the list. And if we get a number of choices under other, we can use that to decide, oh, we need to actually add Acrobat or PDF. We need to actually add Visio. But at the time, we think, our list is probably okay. If nobody, I would not encourage you to use other as your long-term solution. You use it for a while because you want to be able to enforce that you have to have required information in this column, but it might not be one of the choices that were imagined by the business at the time. Three possibilities then in terms of how we display this to users. Drop-down list doesn't take up much space, and that makes it nice. Radio buttons allow the users to see all of the choices, and when they turn one on, it turns the others off. That's how radio buttons or option buttons work. And then finally, checkboxes, and that's the only one of these choices that will allow people to choose multiple selections. We're going to force one choice by using a drop-down menu. An alternative to putting other in here is to turn on yes to allow fill-in choices. And that would allow our users to be able to say, I don't like any of these choices, but I'm going to provide another one. If you're going to allow fill-in choices, you don't need other here in your list. Or we could say, no, we won't allow fill-in choices and we'll capture things under other. This is a good question. For right now, we'll use other. And then finally, what's the default value?
So Jenny, let me see if I understand what you did.
Okay.
If I choose fill in the blank, then my user will be able to put in anything they want at that stage of the game?
Yes.
Okay. And so by turning it to no, they've got to pick from this list of choices.
List of choices. We force choice on them. If you're familiar with terms like list box and combo box, turning on yes here turns this into a combination of a drop-down and a text box.
Okay, thank you.
So it's a valid approach to we're not sure. And it might be that we don't want to put other here, and we don't want to allow fill-in choices because we know what the list is. An example of that is we only take Visa, American Express, Discover, and MasterCard. That's it. We don't want somebody filling in another value, and we're sure what all the values are. In that case, we have a closed list, and we don't allow anything else, and we don't allow other. It doesn't matter that somebody walks in with Diners Club. We don't take that credit card, so we don't allow other. And then finally, of the choices that you've placed up here, what's your default choice? And most of our documents actually are about Excel, so we're going to put Excel on our list. The last item is a checkbox that says, okay, you've created this new custom column with all of these attributes. Do you want to automatically add it to the default view? And that's turned on, and we're going to say okay. If we now look at our list of columns, what you'll see is that we have title, then we have app, and it's required because we said it was. And here are the other columns that were there already. So that we get a little good at this, I'm going to quickly add another column just so we see how this works. Let's create a new one. And this is actually the version of Office that this is good for. So we could say version, or we could say Office. And we're going to actually put choice in here again, because we want them to choose from a list. And this is the Office version for this document. And actually, I'm going to call this doc version up here, just not to be confused with regular versions. Require that this contains information. Yes. Unique values. No. We'll see values repeating all the time. And our choices are, we actually have documents for 2003. We have documents for 2007. We have documents for 2010, for 2013. But it's possible that we would have something that worked for both 7 and 10, for 10 and 13, and so on. So we're going to use checkboxes in this case. I don't have a default value here, and you don't have to have one. You can just clear it out. And that means that nothing will be filled in automatically. So in this case, we have a list. We're allowing users to make multiple choices. They are not allowed to type any value in that's not here already. There's no default. We're going to add this to the default view, this new column. Click OK. And when we scroll down, there it is. Now, if we go back out to our library to see what our progress looks like at this point in time, and we can do that by going right here to our library train docs, our breadcrumbs, we'll see that app and doc version have been added here as custom columns. And that's because we said we wanted to add them to the default view. So now if we were to create a new document or add a document, we would be required to enter that information. If we add a document, and let's just add, for example, this PowerPoint presentation. What we have is we have now a form that says, okay, tell me what the title is. Tell me what app it's for. Tell me what doc version. Here's the drop-down list we created when we created the custom column for app. Boxes that we specified when we specified doc version. And notice that the descriptions that we provided for our users are right here. This is the application that material is used to teach. This is the Office version for this document. So if you don't enter descriptions, you're missing an opportunity to really make it easier for your users to understand what's going on here. Because this is PowerPoint, a really interesting kind of thing happens, which is that there's a title on the very first slide of PowerPoint presentations, and that's what's being picked up as title here. So we can, if this was a Word document, pardon me, if this was a Word or an Excel document, the title would actually probably have nothing in it. But because it's PowerPoint, it's pulling in from our very first title slide. The name does not have to be the same as the title. The title should be what people are calling it. It can be Technology Training Series Session 3. If I leave it blank, actually SharePoint will fill it in with the name. But we can also call this Creating and Customizing Libraries. This is not a file name. This is a title. And I'm going to say that this is actually used for other. In this case, that would be SharePoint and 2010. And I'm going to save this. our library with our first document that we've added. Again, when it was created and modified and by whom is automatically being captured by SharePoint. We never need to do that. Here's the metadata that we specified about app and about document version.
Okay, so because you've loaded this up, I know that in SharePoint, there's a training presentation called Technology Training Series Session 3.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you created it today. I know that it was created by you.
Yep.
I know that it's about it's a technology training document for something other than Office and Word and Excel.
Right.
And we know that it's for the 2010 version of that other application.
Right.
That's what we've got here.
And this turns out in a way to be a really good example because, as you said, all we know that it's other because we didn't allow the user to fill in a choice. So at this point, we might want to say, if we would be better off if we had allowed me to type in SharePoint than forcing me to choose other.
Yeah, I have one that it's a SharePoint app, and so if I want that, how would I go back in and edit that list to selection?
So what we'll do is we'll go back and we're going to recustomize this again. Okay, so we're really back in the section where we're adding columns to library still. We're going back to exactly the same place. We're going to go back to our library tab. We're going to go to our library settings. Again, one-stop shopping for site owners. And we have app here is our
that's
field.
That field that we put in the thing.
Right, that says Excel,
okay.
PowerPoint, and so on. So
okay.
we're just going to go ahead and click that. And we're going to make a difference choice here.
But I've already selected the choices, so I can edit those choices?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to get rid of other. Now, I'm not going to suggest that you do this 5 years from now when you have 1,000 documents in here. But we're early on, and we're sort of testing what we're doing here, right? So we have one document with other in it, and we're going to change that in a minute. And we're going to say yes to allow fill-in choices. Okay? And we're going to say okay. We're going to go back to train docs. And this says other, but we can now change it because we've allowed fill-in choice. Okay. That's what we just did. And so I can click the drop-down and I can edit its properties. This is one way to do this. And here where it's used to have just a drop-down list, now one of the choices is specify your own value. This is because we allow fill-in right here. I can say this is actually about SharePoint. That's the new feature simply by saying allow fill-in choice. So the user can choose from the list, or they can choose to enter their own value.
Okay, so what this could have been, as opposed to just documents about training, I could have had a library of client documents. I could have put in a list of client names, and I could have put the year in or at project definition in the title or something, and I could have put in a whole set of documents by client, by year, and put those fields in here.
Absolutely.
Just like I've done here. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Or we could have a series of documents that we want every new employee to read. But we might want to categorize them by what types of documents they are.
Okay. And
so we could have categories.
Okay.
In any way that we want to be able to organize our information. And so if we just took a look while we stay on the screen for a second, if we're not in SharePoint and we're in Microsoft Windows, what we're probably going to do here is we're going to have a folder for 2003, one for 2007, one for 2010, one for 2013. Inside of that, we're probably going to have a folder for Access and one for Excel and one for Word and one for PowerPoint, perhaps one for other, but we think, oh, no, let's create one for SharePoint and so on. And we are capturing this metadata by the placement of our document. The problem with that, there are several problems with that. One of the problems with that, though, is what about the document that applies to more than one version of Office? A document that applies to more than one customer, more than one region. Do we save it twice? In Windows, that's our choice. A more technical solution in Windows is to save it in one place and to create a hyperlink to it from another, but as users, we don't do that. We just save it in this folder and that folder. And now it's very easy for us to update one but not the other. One of the values that we have in SharePoint is because we're not trying to store things in specific folders, but we're storing things and describing them, in a broader way, we only have one version of this document. There shouldn't be 3 or 4 of them in different areas. If we have a document that is about Microsoft Access, but it's for 2007 through 2013, there won't be 3 versions of it in 3 folders. There'll be one, and it will have 3 check marks in front of it. So being able to have a single source of truth for documents that often appear multiple times is an important value for SharePoint. I probably should tell you that if you delete a custom column, all of the data in it gets thrown away because there's no place else for it to live. So if we were to go back and to remove a column, all of the data that's in it is discarded. So if I wanted to, for example, sometimes people think, oh, I'm just going to delete this and recreate it because I want to rename it. Bad approach. You actually want to just go rename the column, because as soon as you delete a column, the data is discarded.
It's not in the recycle bin. It's not anywhere. It's just gone.
It's gone. When you delete columns, your data's gone. I want to dive back into these library settings one more time, probably 5 more times, but let's jump right back in. You'll remember that I told you that I was going to have you find a way to have a better name here. We want train docs in our URL. I don't want it sitting over here as the library name. So we're going to jump right back into our library settings, go to title, description, and navigation. And this is where I can now edit this and say this is training documents, for example. This does not change the URL. The URL is created at the time you create the library, and it will not be edited later, and you don't have an easy way as a site owner to edit it. So you want to make sure that whatever you use in the first place is really nice. Notice that this didn't change. Train docs is still train docs, but now it's training documents here in the quick launch and here in the library name. So again, because we did this right off, a short name that makes sense. If it's a document library, use docs in it. That doesn't have spaces, underscores if you feel like you need them. And because I use camel case, it stays in the URL. Capital T, capital D, which makes it easy to read. It's train docs. Okay, that works. And then go back and change the name to be whatever it is you want it to be as it's listed here and at the top of the page, because we're in the library and we're in our training documents. We'd like it to look good. We'd like it to look like training documents here in our breadcrumbs and elsewhere.